Frank Kim, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Robby, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure having you here. Where are you in the world physically?
Yeah, I'm based in the San Francisco, California area.
Nice, nice. The Bay Area.
Yes, exactly.
Lovely.
Yeah, go Warriors.
Lovely. Yeah, go Warriors. Oh, nice. I've never had anybody that's worked 13 places at the same time. So you're at least an advisor or an investor in 13 places. And I'm just wondering, you don't even look tired. Like, how do you make that work? How's it possible?
Yeah, I totally switched my schedule. There's that lack of sleep, but I just wake up early. I like to wake up early. And when I was younger, I would sleep in all the time. It was ridiculous. And now I wake up, 4, 5, 6 a.m., depending on the day.
Don't you miss the good old days we could sleep in all day long?
I know, right? Yeah, when I sleep until 7, it's a luxury for sure.
It's a luxury, right? And I also see that from your previous history before those 13, that you've advised companies that have been acquired by Tenable, FireEye, Qualys. So I wish I could have invested in you personally, because that would have been a very good investment by what I've seen on your LinkedIn. So that's great.
Hey, you're too kind. You're too kind. I don't know about that. Just gotten lucky. Met some good people for sure along the way.
Lucky, yeah, I'm sure. But you're not just a money guy. You've also been an executive director for Kaiser Permanente, which was my old doctor when I was living in the Bay Area. So fun fact. And you've also been a CISO for SANS as an organization. And you're also a SANS fellow. What does that actually mean, being a fellow for SANS?
Yeah, well, it means that I've just been basically teaching there, writing courses for a long time. It's been 15 years now. I started, when my oldest daughter, shortly before she was born. And I didn't know where it would go. And, just been teaching, writing courses for a long time. Like you said, was the CISO there for a little bit. And currently lead our cloud and CISO leadership curriculum. So, yeah, it just means, hey, you just, keep on doing more fun stuff.
Yeah. Well, a fellow, no matter where you come from, if you're a fellow, then you're the right guy to talk to in the podcast. Do you have anything else you want to say about yourself? I know I just kind of hijacked your intro with what I thought was cool about you, but there's probably more. Anything else you want to add?
That was probably one of the smoothest, the best intros I've seen, right? If it's not your formal intro, you just weaved it in, so appreciate that.
Yeah, there you go. I'm taking some time off for your busy schedule. So long story short, a client of mine was in Norway. He was attending one of the SANS ICS courses. And so I crashed the party. I went there for one of the party sessions, I guess. And I ran into one of our guy for the Nordics, Mike Bates. So shout out to Mike Bates. Mm-hmm. But basically, I was like, hey, who should I have from SANS on the podcast? And I was thinking, he's like, okay, so what do you want? We have lots of instructors. And I was like, I don't know, somebody that teaches leadership for security. Because I know you've definitely heard this a million times, but this whole next generation security people that we should align with the business. Security is a business enabler. And then he said, I have just the guy for you. And then shortly after I got in contact with you, and he mentioned, that you were the author for 512 and 514.
Yeah, so, that's right.
I thought I'd have this episode with you just to say with all this great experience you have and the fact that you're writing these courses for what is perhaps, the most respected security education organization, what you're teaching in your courses. So I thought I would just interview you about that. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, back in, I'm trying to calculate the years. It was 2015. My business partner at SANS and I, we got the opportunity to kind of formalize what is now the CISO leadership curriculum. And what we've seen over the last 7 or so years is, kind of this rising tide is, of course, more and more people getting into cybersecurity. But then people that were in technical roles, I started my career as a developer, as an engineer, building systems, building apps. And just, to be honest, back then I was just hands down on keyboard. I didn't really pay attention to what was going on in the larger organization. But as I progressed in my career, I realized, oh, shoot, I've got to do a better job leading these teams and giving them the context, understanding what's going on in the larger business. And that's the idea with a lot of the courses that we have is how do you go beyond those technical skills as somebody is progressing? They've got that technical foundation of cybersecurity, moving up into the management, leadership, and executive ranks. And what do they need to think about? How do they think about it differently in terms of presenting to the board, in terms of crafting a business plan that makes sense for the organization, how to get buy-in, how to manage different stakeholders, but then at the same time, like you said, kind of running your security program like a business, not just as a technical capability. So that's what we're trying to help people on their journey to becoming wherever they might be from a cybersecurity leadership perspective.
And that makes sense because I guess most of the, they always talk about the skill shortage, right? So most of the security leaders today, they are probably coming from like a more technical background, since they know the lingo, and they know, they've been in the security world from before. So it makes sense to try it, instead of, educating a whole new workforce of security managers, just take the ones that have been there, I guess, and try to teach them.
Yeah, I will say that the vast majority of people that I meet through SANS is, we've for years provided technical training in different areas. So we do have a lot of kind of technical experts and SMEs and people progressing in their careers. But at the same time, I see a good chunk of people coming to the our leadership classes from outside of those technical realms as well, whether it be from other areas of project management, program management, finance, other kind of leadership areas that they know that they've got to have some hand in pushing forward the state of security in their organization. So yeah, it's true. Still the vast majority of people are coming from within security. But yeah, a lot of people are also coming from other areas in terms of kind of their newfound responsibilities. Sometimes they've got to work with the security team, but other times they've also they're thrust into leadership responsibilities. I know a number of CISOs that have successfully run different areas as executives in different parts of the organization. And once it gets to a certain maturity, the senior leadership says, oh, we need a steady hand to run that, not necessarily just somebody with cyber expertise, but risk and understanding the business and the organization. So yeah, that's usually how it goes.
So I mentioned it earlier. So we have 512 and 514. I would guess that 512 is for. I'll let you introduce it. What is 512 and what is 514?
Yeah. So those are two of our most popular courses in our leadership curriculum here at SANS. The way that we like to think about it, I mentioned that journey, and kind of sometimes people come and ask us, they say, hey, Frank, where's the one class I should take to become a CISO? What's the one thing that I should do to become a CISO? And we really try to take a step back and think about it a little bit more broadly. What's the body of experience and knowledge that people ideally should be aware of and knowledgeable about to kind of move into those progress in their career, basically? So we break it down into two what we call triads. The first one is our transformational cybersecurity leader, and the second one is your operational security executive. So you've got to be transformational, pushing forward the program, but at the same time, you've got to understand how to mature your day-to-day operational activities. So if we stick with the first one, the transformational, you mentioned Management 512, which is our security leadership essentials for managers, and 514, which is our class on strategic planning, policy, and leadership. Those are kind of two of the key elements of that first triad, that first stool, in terms of kind of technology is one pillar, strategy is another pillar, and culture is another pillar, building a sustainable, risk-aware, and security-aware culture. So it's really, 512 is giving the grounding for hopefully what we think that people should have in place to kind of move forward in their career. And then 514 is kind of aligning your technical knowledge with the strategy of the organization, building your strategic plan, essentially.
Cool. I'm assuming these are like 5-day courses, correct? And like in real life, 5-day
both 5-day courses. Yeah. 9 to 5. Yep, that's right.
And they're also like, I understood that the 512 is run through like a game.
Yeah. We have something called Cyber 42. It was originally the code name for this game that we developed. And to be honest, when we got towards releasing it, we couldn't think of a better name, so Cyber 42 stuck.
Yeah.
And it's our security leadership simulation game.
Cool.
And the idea is that it puts you and your team in different scenarios, like you might see at work. So at work, there's some longer running projects, longer running initiatives like, hey, let's build our cloud security program. Let's build our vulnerability management program. But if only we could just focus 100% on that. No, it's day to day. Emergencies come up, situations arise, an incident occurs, a breach occurs, executives want a briefing. So there's these different events that occur as you're building out your program that you have to respond to. And it's kind of like a choose your own adventure. If you ever read those books as a kid, I was the one that read them all cover to cover, right? Looking at all the different options. So the game will present you with effectively, hey, here's a situation. What do you do? A, B, C, or D? And you and your team have to discuss, brainstorm, what are the pros and cons, and choose one. And just like in real world, it's based on limited resources. You got limited time, limited money to make the selections, and you want to try to improve not only your capabilities, but the culture of security at your organization. And this Cyber 42 game is in a number of our classes.
Cool. So now I'm just going to run through the skills learned section, which I'm assuming means like after this class, you would assume you should, you're going to be able to learn these following skills. So make sense of different cybersecurity frameworks, and that's nice because everybody needs to have like a plan to fall back onto, I guess, right? Understand and analyze risk. Interesting. How do you go about teaching that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Robbie. Of course, you hone in on one of the hardest questions here because
Yeah.
especially for technical people, when I was in a technical role, I'm used to thinking about things in black and white. Hey,
Mm.
do this thing and this thing is going to happen. Whereas risk in the business and anything in leadership is usually a little bit gray. So there's a lot of debate on, hey, when we say something is low, medium, or high, hey, well, what does medium actually mean? What's
Mm.
medium times a medium, low impact times medium impact times medium likelihood actually mean? So
Mm.
there's a lot of variance in there. So we talk about some best practices that people
Mm.
can become a little bit better calibrated in analyzing risk. We don't go into detail, to be honest, but we mentioned various quantitative approaches for how you might start to incorporate that and how you convey that to leadership, some of those nuances.
Mm. Is it safe to say like are there frameworks for analyzing risk? Is there actually like I'm not in that world, but I guess there is, right? There's a bunch of different.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a number of NIST frameworks that lay out kind of the process that you might go through to put together a risk-based approach.
Mm.
And then there's the FAIR factor analysis of information risk that they describe as an ontology that helps you do quantitative analysis. That's probably the most well-known quantitative framework.
Mm. Cool. Um, Understand the pros and cons of different reporting relationships. I thought that was interesting, and I assume by that means like whether you're under the CIO or the CEO or on the board, or have any comments on that?
Yeah, exactly. To whom does security ultimately report? To whom does the CISO report? And still, the vast majority of security teams still report up to, as you said, the CIO. And part of that is, there's pros and cons. There's naturally, of course, a tension there between the IT objectives and the security objectives. And but why do the vast majority of organizations still have that reporting relationship? And I find that it's because the vast majority of security progress that we can make is highly dependent upon the maturity of IT. You go into a spot and IT is not very mature. Hey, you as a CISO are going to
Mm.
struggle. And so one of the harder things is as a first-time CISO in an organization, right? You're learning how to build this capability at the organization, but the rest of the org is learning how to work with you. So it's all pros and cons. Our job as a security leader is to manage risk, manage information risk. And part of that is understanding the landscape. So any security leader needs to be able to go in and say, what are the trade-offs, pros and cons of this structural relationship of reporting to the CIO versus the CTO versus general counsel? And how do you best build those relationships, understand different stakeholders' incentives and motivations, and appropriately navigate from there, basically?
Very interesting. Um, oh, I could go. I have so many questions for you, but I'm just going to keep going down the list. Manage and lead technical teams and projects. Is that more like a soft skills sort of section of the course, or?
So you're going through kind of the things that we cover in Management 512, the
Yeah,
leadership
exactly.
security
Yeah.
leadership
Mm.
essentials for managers class. And at a very high level, if you think about your security program, you might have two types of security programs. You might have a technical focused security team, and you might have a governance focused security team.
Mm.
And in organizations where those are separated, in more mature organizations, there's kind of a conflict. Is that IT team, technical teams, the dev teams will see the governance related team as, oh, just basically paper pushers.
Mm.
Whereas if you're only a technical team, well, you can't really navigate the org as well. So those, need to be carefully married. So, and part of that is you as the leader building confidence in your team, understanding what they're doing, what they're proposing, is it the right direction? So me as a person with a technical background, I'm not the one any longer sitting there hands on keyboard doing all of the things.
Mm.
But fortunately, I've seen enough to where I know that, hey, if the team is suggesting this, what's the right question to ask?
Yeah.
What direction should we go? Is it a different architecture that we should consider? And they understand that, hey, I've got just enough, background to be dangerous.
Mm. Right. It's really funny because in mnemonic we're 300 people. We have a GRC division, and then we have everybody else that's not in GRC. We just call them the suits, and they wear Patagonia, and then the sock they're rocking around with Crocs, right? So, but it's good tension. It's fun tension internally here. Interesting. Build a vulnerability management program.
vulnerability management, that's one of the two, for me, things that I believe are the hardest things to do in any security program. Vulnerability management, because you've got to do it right. It's not just about scanning. To actually get things fixed, remediated in the appropriate way, there's a lot of cats that you've got to herd, essentially. So vulnerability management, I think that's one of the hardest things to do effectively in a very mature way. And the side note, the other thing I think is the hardest thing to do is the SOC. Just from a day-to-day perspective, there's just so much happening. So yeah, hats off to anybody who has to run vulnerability management and the SOC every single day.
Yeah, right. And that's usually under the same sort of umbrella, if you will, right? I've at least in a lot of the organizations I've worked with, it's like if they're buying a SOC or a CM, they're also throwing in vulnerability management. Maybe it's on the vendor side because they kind of include all that in one license a lot of the times.
Yeah, that's very interesting because whenever I've spent a lot of time on the enterprise side, doing security for various organizations, and when doing it on the internal side, I've always had SOC as one pillar, and then vulnerability management as another sister team. And within vulnerability management, I've always had the scanning capability. But what I found is that depending on your line of business, like if you're a vendor, for example, providing services, vulnerability scanning might be, kind of a service or a part of the SOC itself. But yeah, for me, I've always seen, and I've always set up the teams in a way where I've got vulnerability management kind of as a sister team to the SOC. So the SOC is not distracted in their day-to-day mission of finding the bad guys, and the vulnerability management is dealing with all of the internal things to actually get things fixed.
Get it fixed, get it patched, right? I guess the scanning part is maybe it's in a lot of the SOCs because the SOC wants that data. They want to know if
For sure.
some information on the assets. Yeah, that makes sense. That leads into my next one, though. Strategically leveraging a CM and leading a security operations center. I'm very, very sure you also have another course on those two topics, right? So this is more of an introduction to that.
Good guess. Yeah, it's a relatively new course that just went to a 5-day version as well. That's MGT 551. Yeah, that's building and leading security operations centers.
And then you go into, okay, so I'm looking at these points here now, and I know for a fact you have to have, I know you have a class on changing behavior and building security aware culture, correct? But you want to say a few words about that? Because that's interesting, because I've always wondered, like, what, have we gone away from, like the security awareness training and that's it? Or like, what are companies doing? What are you teaching them these days about like how to approach that in a modern way to not make people angry and click through all these courses online?
Yeah, for a long time, we've had a class on building security awareness programs, MGT 433. And as those people have progressed there and as security teams have gotten more mature in that area, and we're talking about kind of people progressing in their journey, what we found is that, hey, you've got the technical capabilities in place, you've got some good awareness in place that's changing some behaviors, but then I've also seen numerous companies where the security team kind of slowly disintegrates because a CISO leaves, the key people leave, and a handful of people leave, and when that happens, that's an indication that there wasn't a sustainable culture, risk-aware culture, security-aware culture, and a sustainable process. So the class on building a security culture, MGT 521, is all about that, using various kind of best practices, management, leadership, cultural change tools to kind of build that security-aware culture into the organization. So when one person leaves, a few people leave, 5 people leave, it doesn't matter. Things can still continue.
The system is still there, right? Since you are if I understood you correctly in the beginning, you're the cloud security lead, correct? For SANS.
Yep, that's right.
Enable modern security architectures and the cloud. Build security engineering capabilities using automation and infrastructure as a code. And those are they must be relatively new to the whole SANS course, or have they been there for a while now?
Yeah, the cloud curriculum at SANS, we've always had some cloud courses, but we started the cloud curriculum formally at SANS in February 2020. So we all know what happened, the month after that, hey, COVID hit, everybody locked down. It was actually kind of the timing worked out in retrospect. And what we're seeing is that so many people, it was just as recently as 5 years ago that customers that I'd be talking to, they're like, no, we're not going to do cloud. We're very wary of that. And, we're kind of worried about our data. So now, of course, fast forward to today, everybody is whole hog in the cloud.
Yep.
But by definition, everybody is multi-cloud. Any large company, because of acquisition, because of different departments, different organizational needs, they're in multiple cloud providers, AWS, Azure, GCP, and they're also hybrid. because they've got some traditional infrastructure. The vast majority, not 100%, but the vast majority of them are in that situation. So as a result, we in security, we've got to be familiar with all of those technologies now, understand the pros and cons, the differences, the trade-offs in terms of the configurations and security ramifications. And a lot of that is working with the engineering teams, ops teams, and the DevOps teams. Well, what are they doing? Well, they're automating all of their processes using DevOps, using CI/CD, using infrastructure as code. So now to secure it appropriately, we've got to be knowledgeable about those things in terms of being a modern security leader. And we've got the opportunity to incorporate those practices into the security program itself to make us more effective, to automate more things, which we see, with SOAR, related to the SOC, or orchestration, automation, and response, but that being built into other areas of our overall architecture and our engineering practices too.
In your position, I would assume that you meet a lot of very mature security teams. I know that there's one in Norway. I remember, I don't want to say their name, but they're a financial organization. And it was like 2 years ago, I would have said that they were like the most mature. They went to a cabin in Norway and they spent a week, which doesn't sound like that much, but they spent a week. Everybody left their families for a week and just sat down like, okay, how do we automate security? They were in the cloud, right? And now today they were going conferences and speaking about what their journey was. How many have actually made it that far with like infrastructure as a code and being able to use SOAR or SOAR, however you say it over there? Like, how have you actually seen that adopt, or on that side of the world, or is it still kind of like it's in the PowerPoint presentation and not being used very much?
Yeah, it's funny when you say that, hey, seeing various companies and probably seeing some mature companies, kind of when you're in it, when you're in the forest, it's hard to see. I've been in various companies over the years, and when I'm in it, I'm like, there's so much more we can improve. We're not very mature. But then when I leave or look at it in relation to something else, I'm like, I guess we were doing pretty good. Every company is struggling with that right now. So there are various, I would say that different security capabilities, kind of like the list that you just went through effectively, different companies are at different points for each of those things. And it's really kind of that consistent kind of maturity of, okay, well, do we need to invest here? Should we invest here? If we invest here, because we've got limited time, resources, attention, what else can we build out? So we're still relatively early. For example, in the multi-cloud space, by definition, the fact that we're in multi-cloud, now from a logging and monitoring perspective, it's pretty much impossible to put all of that signal from all of those clouds directly into let's say your central SIEM. So now the analysts have to know that, maybe we need to go here a little bit to look at this, or maybe certain data is fed in, or maybe we need to go look at this cloud provider here. So it's becoming a little bit more right from a fragmented from that perspective in the initial maturity phase.
So it's a paradigm shift to where things are being analyzed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and cost is even just one factor, right? So centralizing it all in one place in terms of not only the storage, but for example, one way in AWS that you would get some of the AWS logs, the signal into wherever, is to stream it via Kinesis data streams. But if you're an extremely large organization, hey, that's going to cost a lot of money just to even stream that data. So you might have to re-architect it in a way that, hey, maybe you're not taking that approach in terms of how much data you actually want to ingest.
Yeah, so there's a lot of trade-offs, I guess, in this multi-cloud world. How do you go about, we'll just spend a little time there. How do you go about, like, what is your advice for companies that are in that situation? It's all about architecture, I guess, at that point, and just understanding that you have trade-offs and just making the right decision and planning for it to change in the future, I guess, or...
Yeah, that's what, you started by asking about the frameworks, and that's why we kind of say, hey, well, what's the overarching structure of this? It's kind of the quote unquote governance in terms of kind of what's your plan, what's your strategic plan, what are your tied back to your business objectives, right? So that could be cost, but ultimately achieving the mission, right? These are all factors. But then what's your architecture? And it doesn't mean that you have to have one holistic architecture for the entire enterprise. You might have architecture related to part of your cloud estate, for example, and kind of take one bite that you can chew from there. But then it's built upon that foundation of those engineering practices that we just talked about. But underlying all of these, the architecture, the engineering, kind of the governance, is the underlying management and leadership skills. Basically, hey, how do you lead, motivate, and inspire your teams to want to get the work done? So that's kind of that's one of the challenges of security, is that, especially coming from a technical background, a lot of, we think that, hey, everything is got a technical solution. That's not necessarily the case. right?
Mm.
So we've already got a whole slew of tools in our environments. It's not more about the next product so much per se as, hey, how do you make what you have better, a little bit more effective? To what's the problem? Basically, getting back to the root cause of why are we actually doing this?
Mm. Cool. Very interesting. Very interesting. Um, moving down the list. Get up to speed quickly on information security issues and terminology. So, what are the information security issues? I could go on forever. But what specific ones, or are there that many? I'm overcomplicating it.
Well, the whole security acronyms is ridiculous. Even if you just take frameworks, all the frameworks are intended to make security a little easier to understand. But if you read those hundreds of pages of PDF documents, like for better or for worse, I have, then you'll find that alphabet soup of acronyms can be a little bit confusing. Then you've got the whole alphabet soup of the different security tools and products and so on. But
Mm.
really, it's kind of getting it back to first principles. What are the core concepts? And, hey, what is, for example, we were talking about infrastructure as code, and I kind of threw out there in passing CI/CD, and
Mm.
that's not a security specific thing, but
Mm.
that's something we as security leaders have to understand. We need to know continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment to
Mm.
work in this modern world. And
Mm.
so part of it is, well, what are the trade-offs? If you're in a waterfall type of approach, well, what takes precedence? Well, the plan takes
Mm.
precedence. Well, if you're in an agile approach, well, what takes precedence? Well, trust in the
Mm.
team takes precedence because you're working in a fast way every single day. If you're in a DevOps environment, what takes precedence? It's still trust because you need to trust your fellow team members and the other areas, but it's automation also that
Mm.
takes precedence there. So as a result, then, based on those drivers, we've got to alter our approach.
Mm. Cool. Very, very, very interesting course. I'm going to call my boss right after this. But before that, 514, security, strategic planning, policy, and leadership. What's the difference between this one and 512? This is a more for a
Yeah,
more
so if
seasoned security professional, I guess, or?
Well, if 512 is the course on technology, right, those items we've talked about, well, 514 is the course on strategy, is how do you translate what you're doing into a strategic plan overall. And it's
Mm.
interesting because 514, the people that attend the course, I would say that the vast majority in the middle, what 60 or 70% or so, are in some sort of leadership position already, whether it's a lead, a manager, a director, a technical director, a VP, whatever it might be. And then, we've got a number of CISOs that come to the class as well. But on the other end of the spectrum, maybe the 15, 20% of people are people that aren't technically, formally in a leadership role, although everybody in whatever role in any organization is a leader depending on what they're doing.
Mm.
But they're in an analyst role or an engineer role, and they come to class and they say, well, I know that this is where I want to go in my career, and I've found myself in situations where it's hard for me to talk to my immediate boss, and I don't understand what his boss's boss or her boss's boss's boss actually wants. In fact, I've had some CISOs take the class, and they've said, hey, I'm sending my people to this class so that they can better understand what I need to provide to senior leadership.
Mm.
So the idea here is that, hey, well, how do you put together your plan? How do you put together your roadmap? Do your gap analysis that feeds into all of that, but have it be based upon your actual business drivers. And we talk about various leadership tools, management tools. Some people, former students, have called this kind of a cyber MBA within a week.
Mm.
So the idea is, yeah, you put together your overall plan, and then your business case, your metrics, you present it appropriately, and then, well, okay, once you've got your plan in place, how do you execute on that? Well, policy, which we cover in the course, is one of the strongest tools, levers that we've got to steer the organization in appropriate direction, kind of codifies your plan into the organization. But then to get this all done, well, you've got to lead your team in the right way. So we talk about leadership and various management skills and competencies on a whole day of the course. And then, lastly, I almost forgot to mention this. The very last day of the course is a kind of a capstone day. We called it our strategic planning workshop. So in addition to Cyber 42, which we've got in the class, we've got various case studies, fictional scenarios, fictional companies, but we also have various Harvard Business School case studies in the
Mm.
class that are security focused. And so the workshop is a capstone day where it's a day of all case studies, where teams, people, students will read the case study and then bring the different management tools that we've covered to bear on those case studies and kind of analyze the situation and think about, well, what can we do differently, or what would we do differently going forward?
When it comes to getting management on board with your plans, if you're a security leader, right? I would assume it's definitely easier now than it was 5 definitely 10 years ago to like get a budget and get support for it. But what are the main problems you're still seeing these days? Is it still, we're not speaking their language because we didn't read the yearly report, or the mission statement of the company, or what are the main, like, what are we still failing at? What do we need to
Yeah.
improve on still as a whole?
Hey, great question. I would say kind of two things. One, it depends on the audience, who you're talking to, the level of leadership. So when you're presenting to the board, for example, the most important thing, like if you're just starting out presenting to the board, is it's not just about inundating them with information. It's when the boardroom doors close, the meeting is adjourned, is you want them to leave thinking, Robby, he really knows what he's talking about, and we're in good hands,
Mm.
right? We basically what we're getting at is, hey, trust. Do they trust you to do what needs to be done, right? Do they have confidence in you? And you can convey that in a number of different ways. This is over a series of conversations.
Mm.
Just in that first board meeting, if we just met on the street and I walked up to you and said, Robby, hey, let's be friends. You can trust me, right? You'd be like, hey, no, why would I can't trust you. Get away from me, you weirdo.
Yeah.
And you can't expect in the first board meeting, just one meeting, for them to trust you immediately. So this is a whole progression.
Mm.
And I would say that the second thing here is a security leader has to understand the business context. So it has to be stage appropriate, what they are suggesting. I was doing a consulting engagement a little while ago this year, and the CISO had just left this organization, not by their own volition. And I was talking to the CEO, and she said, "Well, hey Frank, we're a multi-billion-dollar company, unicorn valuation, and when the CISO came in, I felt like he kind of flipped the script on me. All of a sudden, he's saying, hey, we need $250,000 for this endpoint tool, and we need $150,000 for this, and we need $100,000 for that. And we want to do the right thing, but given our stage, we've gotten a lot of funding, we've got a good valuation, but we're focused on bringing revenue in the door."
Mm.
So what the disconnect was I think he was taking a kind of enterprise playbook for a more mature company, trying to plop that into that organization, whereas what that organization needed, it was not 80% of his time building those mature capabilities, but let's just say 20% of his time building some form of those capabilities, and 80% of his time enabling sales and enabling the business.
Yeah.
And over time, as the company grows, that will change. But yeah, so that's the second thing, is be stage appropriate.
Mm. How has your experience in the boardroom been? Maybe you're coming at a different
Yeah,
angle because you're advising, but if you have any.
yeah, you definitely have to do your homework. Like you said, these meetings don't happen too frequently, maybe once a quarter, and you might have your obligatory 15-minute slot.
Mm.
And depending on what's on the agenda and kind of what's top of mind, you might get a longer time, or that time might be extended. So it also depends on the approach of the board and that company. Is a lot of times it's not just the board presentation itself, but it is the pre-read materials. So the last board presentation that I did sometime earlier this year, it wasn't just the presentation, but they said, hey, we want a little mini write-up, a 2, 3, 4-page document and corresponding info. I know that some other boards, talking to some other friends and CISOs, is that, hey, they don't want the one-word PowerPoint slide. They don't want the image on the PowerPoint, because they do their homework. They pre-read all of this stuff. So they want dense
Mm.
PowerPoint slides. And so because they're gonna read it ahead of time. And so then as a result, when you're in the meeting, you probably want to present that too, because that's what they've seen, and you want to remind them of what they have read beforehand. So I think it really depends on what the intent of that particular meeting, or where you are in your journey talking to the board, and what's already been established. If you're presenting to the board for the first time, you definitely want to see what other material has been presented to get a sense of how it's constructed. I did another board presentation, for example, where they really just wanted a overview of the threat landscape. So those slides were maybe not as dense. I did send a pre-read, kind of more detailed information, but the slides were really just walking through, well, what are the risks, what's the threat landscape look like, and then what's most appropriate for them, or what's most relevant to them based on their business and based on the assets that they have.
Cool. KPIs, and like for a boardroom that's boardroom appropriate. I saw some article about this on LinkedIn. Do you have any thoughts around that? Like what some effective ones are? Or are there any general KPIs that are effective, or is it too much based on the situation for that company?
Yeah. So those key performance indicators are super important. Usually what I like to do is I kind of like to frame the overall story and kind of the basic, the bare minimum that you want to have in place in terms of an effective kind of metrics presentation to the board or conversation is have some level of maturity, right? Showing that, hey, for your various capability areas, identify, protect, detect, and respond, and so on, hey, are you a level 1 to 5? Are you level 2 to 5? Whatever it might be. And then you want to show how you compare. So basically, you're saying, where are we today? Where do we want to get to? And then most importantly, how do we compare to industry peers? And then you want to show your progress over time. I had one place I was at, I would have a monthly, it wasn't a board meeting, but it was a monthly meeting with the CEO and other executives in the organization to show how the security team was progressing, our plan was progressing. Now, in retrospect, that monthly meeting was probably too frequent, but month to month, my slides really didn't change. What changed was a little bit the line, effectively, quote unquote line, showing where we were in the overall plan, the progress we were making, what our investments are getting us, and are we effective in the things that we're actually doing? So that's what you want to try to convey. And one element of that is your key performance indicators. And that might be that might be on an appendix, that might be kind of on the side or a call out to say, and this is one example of a thing that indicates this as part of our overall plan. So with the board in particular, I like to try to keep it, that overall big picture. And then if they have questions, we can certainly talk about those things. Now, it depends on the level of technical detail of the board, but most of the boards that I've interacted with are not getting into all of the weeds.
Right. Yeah, you know what? It doesn't sound that... I like the way you just presented it. Like you have your framework, and then you have where we are, where we're going, and then, at the end of the day, those KPIs are dependent on that. And yeah, like you said, keep it simple. And also, if you're meeting your management once a month, it also gives you an arena to discuss the problems you may be having. Yeah, I always thought it'd be so much more complicated than that, but yeah, maybe that's the point of the frameworks. Have something to fall back on and have something to communicate your strategy around.
Hey, we made it sound easier than it is, but it is hard to put that stuff together. I've been in situations where going into a place that we had basically no metrics, and it took couple years to get to a point where I felt like the metrics program was at some decent state of maturity. So it's a journey for sure in getting there. We're just kind of talking about kind of the ideal state here.
Well, Mr. Kim, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, and thank you for creating these courses on behalf of all of us in the security community. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. And what do they say? There's a quote that says, "It takes an intelligent person to explain something and make it sound easy or simple." I'm not sure if that's a quote, but you at least did that today, and I appreciate that.
Hey, Robby, you're too kind. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Take care. Talk to you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.